Hi, good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good to see all of you. My name is Seti Warren. I'm the director of the Institute of Politics here at Harvard Kennedy School. Welcome for what I think will be a really great in-depth analysis of the speech that President Trump gave to Congress last night. I want to introduce our panelists and our moderator this morning. First, Mike Donilon, former advisor to President Biden and chief strategist for Biden in 2020 and 2024 presidential campaigns. Brendan Buck, great to see you, Brendan, who's on the screen, communications strategist and political analyst who served in the offices of the last two Republican speakers of the House. Jonathan Martin, political bureau chief and senior political columnist at Politico. And I should mention, all four of these people have been IOP Fellows. Dan Balz, chief correspondent at Washington Post, and is with us here at the IOP, again, another fellow. And Brittany Shepard is moderating this morning, national politics reporter at ABC News. Please welcome our great panel.
Am I on? Is my mic on? Wait. Yeah, there we go. Hi, good morning, everyone. How are we feeling after tonight? Short little speech, right? Really digestible. I'm really fascinated about our conversation. You know, Mike and I were actually watching it together with our study groups last night and figuring it out in real time. Lots of historic firsts, just including historic length of a speech. I think we should just start there. Coming in just under 100 minutes, I think it was 99 minutes and something seconds. Last night's joint address to Congress was the longest such speech, I think, in my lifetime in modern history. You can fact check me, Jonathan, if that's not true. So I'm going to ask everyone, do a little bit of a round robin to open it up, and feel free to interrupt each other. We're here in conversation. Good use of that time. I'll start with you, Jonathan, and then we'll end with you, Brendan. Sound good?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Great to be back at the IOP, a place that we love. Yeah, the length of it and just the sort of the ubiquity of Trump and Trumpism, I thought last night was sort of a good insight onto our politics today more broadly. Mm-hmm. He dominates the scene by dint of his personality more than any policy agenda. Yes, he laid out a variety of proposals and initiatives, but it's really, the Trumpism is really about the Trump show and about the performance and about selling of Trump than any actual agenda. Now that may change here in the months and years ahead if he does pursue some of these expansionist policies, and the good folks of Panama and Greenland may have a different view if he does go through with some of those plans. But I was just struck mostly by the indulgence of Trump and not just the length, but how much he wanted to make it about his pet issues instead of what the voters actually elected him on. You know, he had a great insight in a Time magazine interview that he gave after the election when he was named Times Man of the Year, in which he said, "Have you heard of this word called groceries? There's this word groceries. I kept hearing groceries." And it was the most, I thought, shrewd analysis of the election that I had heard. He said, "I won because of groceries." And so Trump should have taken his own advice, I thought, and focused more about why voters actually elected him.
I don't think we heard the word egg until like
the cost of goods
45 minutes in, right?
And just lastly, the split screen between him talking about any manner of issues versus the minimal attention devoted to why he was elected, which is to bring down costs, against the backdrop of 2 days of sort of market drama. Because of the fear of the tariffs that he is enacting on China, Mexico, and Canada. I thought, to me, looking at the sort of medium to long term is the big takeaway. Trump focuses on Trump and not what the voters actually are most interested in, which is the cost of goods, an issue potentially being made worse by his actions rather than his rhetoric.
Mike, do you agree? The Trump show, is that what stood out to you?
Well, I don't know. I guess I look at it a little different, I guess. One is, I thought it was good in the sense that we really ought to get rid of these false assumptions we have about Trump. He is who he is. And he spoke for an hour and 40 minutes because he can. And he ran for president because he felt he would be uninhibited and unlimited. And that's who he is. And this notion, I think a lot of people looked at Trump and wrote about him on the economy. I don't think Trump ever spent much time on it at all. And I don't think he ever really cared about it. He may have mentioned groceries in that article, but I bet if you did a content analysis of what he said in the campaign, what he said in the campaign is what he talked about last night. There's no one in this country who should think that Trump got elected on anything but what he told people he's going to do, and he's doing it. And I actually think his policy is pretty straightforward. Right? On the economy, he thinks you should cut taxes, you should raise tariffs. And he doesn't think he's wrong. He ran on it. And Wall Street may wake up every day saying, you know what, he's going to wake up. He's going to understand it's going to raise prices. He's going to understand it's going to destabilize the world economy. I don't believe that. He's deeply invested in it. He ran on a culture war, on immigration, on going after transgender rights, on pronouns. That is what he ran on. And he does have a policy. His policy is to align with Russia and to stop supporting Ukraine. He's doing that, right? He stopped all the funding a day or two ago. And, you know, his intention is to get a peace deal because his intention is to get a Nobel Prize. But he has a very clear view. And I think his views, John, I guess what Trumpism is policy. It is policy, right? Tariffs are his economic policy. We should face it, right? And it's a great opportunity for Democrats, okay? Right? Walking away from Ukraine and embracing Russia and China, those are his policies, okay? Right? He's determined to carry out the most aggressive, harsh immigration policy the country has ever seen. And he's doing it. So I guess when I saw him last night, my hope is that we stop looking at Trump and listening to him and hearing something that he's not saying. I give this to Trump. He is quite straightforward. He does not hide the ball. And what he talked about last night, that's what he intends to do as president. And I think it's a great opening for the Democratic Party. I think it's going to be a real eye-opening for the country. But I think he's quite clear and determined. There used to be this line about Trump, but do you take him literally or seriously, right, or figuratively? I say both. I think what he says he intends to do, I think he intends to acquire Greenland. Right? He intends to take back the Panama Canal. It seems crazy, right? And look, he is carrying out an unprecedented attack on federal workers and the federal bureaucracy. He's doing it partly because he thinks it's a way to dismantle the deep state. He's doing it partly because there's a view about excessive spending and government spending. But I don't think he's hiding the ball. And that's my takeaway.
I agree with Mike. I don't think he's hiding the ball at all. I want to talk about it in two ways. One is, even before Trump was elected, the State of the Union has deteriorated from kind of a big moment to lay out a lot of policy to a show. And there's no better showman in the country, or certainly in American politics, than Donald Trump. And he took this form and bent it in all the ways that he wanted to do, which is why there were so many moments in which he was speaking about somebody in the gallery. Those were ways for him to send signals about his values, his policies, but also to break up what is otherwise sometimes a long and long inventory of this policy initiative and this policy initiative and this. So he's done it in a different way, and he does it the way he's most comfortable with. And frankly, I think Democrats, struggle to accept that that's what this moment has turned into. I think the other thing I looked at last night was the degree to which this is a forgettable moment. The impact of a State of the Union or a joint speech to Congress, joint session speech to Congress, is minimal. There's no particular bounce that somebody gets, and if they get a bounce in the polls, it fades very quickly. Nobody really remembers all of the details of this. So this was a moment for Trump to be Trump, to say what he wanted to say. But I think, and I go back to part of what Mike was saying, there's a period of reckoning that's yet to come. I mean, I think Trump was elected for a variety of reasons. He was elected to shake up the country and to shake up the government. He was elected because people were unhappy about the economy. He was elected because people thought the border was out of control. There are a variety of things that he has talked about. In the first, 6 weeks, he's issued, he said 100 executive orders. In his first year as president, Barack Obama did 40. He's governing by executive order, which we know has limits. He has ahead of him. I mean, this has been, I won't call it a honeymoon, but this has been a kind of an easy period. They were ready to start their administration at a very fast pace, and in a way in which the term shock and awe we've used, a way to shock the country. But that doesn't solve the problems that are facing the country or that people are feeling. And down the road, he's going to have to deliver on those things. I think he has some measure, some leash at this point. There's some signs that he's, his numbers are coming down a little bit, but they haven't cratered in any significant way yet. He's got some time, but not unlimited time. And I think that, last night was performative. As he goes forward, he's going to have to be, somebody who delivers.
And you say shock. Another word that comes to mind for me is disruptive. It's a big term in Silicon Valley and the tech industry. And I think it's so indicative of how someone like Elon Musk, so close to him in the Oval, and we'll get to all of that and the Musk appearance. But I want to get to you, Brendan, in Zoom land. The original question was, okay, 100 minutes. You think it's a good use of your time? Do you think that speech last night was a snapshot of what's to come in the next 4 years and the Make America Great Again agenda?
Well, first of all, let me apologize for not being there in person. I'm sorry. I mean, that's kind of a bummer to be on Zoom. It's my 4-year-old's birthday, and so I needed to cook bacon and eggs. Look, I think it was a snapshot into what the sort of Republican ecosystem is right now. This was a really, to Jonathan's point, self-indulgent speech. I mean, you usually want to make sure that you start off the remarks focusing on, the top issue, because that's when most people are paying attention. People go to bed eventually. Make sure you get in what's important. And he spent a lot of that time just recounting his win, talking about statistics from how he, the electoral college win he had and how the map was red. And that I don't know who that really speaks to. I mean, with anything with Trump, you sort of have to just suspend disbelief on what he's saying, because it's so obviously over the top. I don't know how many times last night we heard that, something was tremendous, something we've never seen before. You have to go back to George Washington to be able to compare. He said at one point that he's done more in, I think, 43, 44 days than most people do in 8 years. I don't know how credible that is. And sometimes, for your average viewer, I think they're just going to roll their eyes. But within that sort of Republican media ecosystem, that's the kind of stuff you hear all the time. And I think that the question is, does that really convince people who are outside of that bubble? Because, to Dan's point, there's a lot of stuff going on in the real world that doesn't feel like everything is great, or that he's solved a lot of problems already. I don't know that anybody feels better that the Gulf of Mexico is now called the Gulf of America. So it was certainly self-indulgent and probably made him feel really well about his standing in the party and the division that he's got there. But in terms of lasting impact, I have to agree with Dan. I don't know what he really accomplished.
You think it's good for the party at all? I mean, there's 2 big governor's races this year. The midterms are coming sooner than anyone in this room may want to think. People are really soft campaigning now. I mean, you can only keep up the momentum of winning House, Senate, and the White House for so long, Brendan. So I'm just curious if you think that what happened last night will have any impact on setting tone for these upcoming races, or do you think there's not really a connection so much?
It's hard for me to draw a connection. I imagine in this, the funny thing about Trump presidencies is something that can seem absolutely outrageous and you feel like it's going to change politics forever. We forget about in a week because you're on to the next thing. Who remembers the press conference after the plane crash in Washington?
Right.
It was just one of those moments, like everybody gawking at what he was saying, and 3 days later, nobody even remembered. So nothing really lasts forever. I think maybe the thing to appreciate from it is everybody in the Republican Party needs to sort of play in this sandbox of issues that Trump cares about, and there's really no room to get out of that. Now, I don't know that he drew a lot of like uncomfortable hard lines for anybody, but if it wasn't clear already, this is his party. They are going to be, the rapturous applause that he gets from that side just kind of speaks to how much he's dominated things.
Right.
But that's the challenge with Trump. He lives with his base. He never wants to leave the cul-de-sac of his political base, and has never made any attempt to do so, and was basically rewarded for it by winning last year. The challenge, though, is that his 35% of the country is like the congressional Republicans bounding to their feet. They love it. The challenge is that that's not good enough, and that's going to create challenges for his party going forward, because the broader swath of American voters did actually elect him because they were unhappy with the cost of goods and inflation. Not his core voters, but the crucial but smaller group of people who are more uncertain about their political allegiances, who do tend to swing, voted for him because they were paying too much for gas and at the grocery store. Right. And those folks heard very little last night because that doesn't animate Trump. And so it makes him sort of happy and he enjoys himself up there. But how is he doing anything to help his party? And the answer is he's not. And we've seen the movie before because we all lived through it. He wins in 2016 and then 2017, really through 2020, you have a period of a 3-year backlash effectively against Trump, his conduct and his policies, and Democrats reap the benefit. The only question now is, are Democrats so weakened? Is their brand so rotten that they can't reap the benefits like they did in from 17 to 20?
Let's talk about Democrats. And I wanted to first maybe talk about those made-for-TV moments, but we can get there later. What do you guys make of what I'll call maybe like the resistance within the chamber? There's the Al Green of it all, and there's also a bunch of House Senate Democrats with signs, criticizing Elon Musk. There was this tweet by Simone Sanders, who used to work for the vice president, who's now at MSNBC, that I thought was a little bit indicative of kind of how I felt in the moment. She wrote, "Why are Democrats just sitting there? The signs are not landing. It's giving bingo, sigh." Do we agree with some, was that effective protests? And maybe a more meta question, is the State of the Union or a joint address a place to be voicing that protest? Mike, you want to start?
No, but you asked me.
Yeah.
My view is no, it's not the place. I don't think it looks great sitting there with signs. And as someone who I helped write for them and was there for them, the theater and is a little tiresome. So I will say this though about Congressman Green though, maybe it was or wasn't the moment to do what he did, but he did one of the most important things. Okay? There is going to be a big debate in this country about Medicaid. Big debate. It impacts 70 million people. The Republicans are in a box because Trump has said you cannot touch Social Security. Well, apparently you can touch the personnel. And you can't touch Medicare. And my sense is that Trump has a very outdated view of what Medicaid is in this country. It's a really critical healthcare plan for a lot of hardworking folks. And I think they're going to go after it. And I think Green called that out. And I think, first of all, as a political matter for the party, I think it's going to be a very powerful part of the conversation. I mean, I guess I'll go back a long time when, Bill Clinton gets reelected president because Newt Gingrich decides he wants to cut Medicare. What happens? It's not any more or less complicated than that. And so I think they've really stepped into something here which is going to be very hard for them to navigate. I think the fact that he called it out was important first for the substantive issue that's going to be in front of the country. And frankly, also because, you know what, I think it's something that Democrats should care about and stand up on. We should defend folks who are in this position, and we should defend it as something that we believe in. And so, so I think, you know, from that perspective, I thought what he did was really important. And I thought the way it was handled wasn't great, to usher him out of the chamber. I thought it was unsettling for people to watch. But to me, you know, I guess a little bit going to what Dan was saying. I mean, if you push forward to where this is going to hit reality, okay, the budget is moving. They have really painful cuts in it. And I think if they stick with it, especially in the context, the kind of tax cuts they're talking about, I think it's going to hurt them. And it could be the one thing that alone will cost them the midterm. So I think from that perspective, I think what he did was important as a political matter, and also important as a matter of Democrats saying pretty clearly what we believe, what we're willing to fight for. And that's something worth fighting for.
I'm curious to see who follows suit. You know, I think momentum is just as important, right, than just the moment itself of the State of the Union.
I'm agnostic on Al Green's protest last night.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Mike makes a good point that, you know, drawing a line on that issue is important. And I yesterday thinking about this and the budget fight ahead, I was also reminded of what Mike was talking about, which was the 1995-1996 government shutdown led by Newt Gingrich, in which he lost that battle, and it crippled Bob Dole in the 1996 campaign, and Clinton, who had taken a huge beating in the 1994 midterms, was revived by that battle and went on. You know, I think the parallels between that moment and today are limited, in part because of the state of the Democratic Party and the absence of a clear leader at this point, whereas the Democrats, when Clinton was president, obviously had a leader. I think whoever is the out party at a joint session speech is in a terrible position.
Yeah.
You know, if you sit on your hands, your base is irritated and angry, and you know, and if you stand up and protest all the time, it begins to look a little foolish, and it's as performative as what the other side is doing, jumping up and cheering. So it is kind of a no-win, but we are moving into the period, as I said, where executive orders aren't going to solve the problems. And these budget battles are serious and real. And the first one that's going to be confronted is whether there's a government shutdown starting a week from Friday night at midnight. It looks as though that is very, very possible at this point. One of my colleagues thinks that if it happens, it could go on for a while. Somebody who's closer to these matters in Congress than I am. But that's just dealing with funding the government for the rest of this year. It doesn't get anywhere close to what the Republicans want to do in terms of the budget and the tax cuts. And the tax cuts are very important to President Trump to get those extended. And last night, you know, he came out, as he's done before, for no tax on tips, et cetera, which is going to make that tax bill even bigger, which is going to make the gap between what they're able to do in terms of cutting spending significantly larger, adding to the deficit. I don't know whether the public will ever care that much about more money being added to the national debt, but that's a reality. But the Medicaid fight is a serious fight. I mean, the House Budget Resolution says that the Energy and Commerce Committee has to cut $880 million out of the programs that they have, and basically that's Medicaid. And if you talk to state governors who were in town couple of weeks ago, they are very, very nervous, including Republican governors, about what might happen here, because they're going to be left holding the bag. So these budget fights are serious, and I don't know that the Republicans have really come to terms with what they have walked into.
What say you about all of that? And I do want to kind of ask you about the converse of what I was asking Mike about the Democrats' resistance. I think about a third way into the speech, maybe earlier. Trump addressed Democrats directly and say, I can't make you smile. I can't make you laugh. Why won't you clap? Nothing I can do can please you. And then kind of had a call and response with Republicans. Do you feel like that's appropriate? You think that that's the right way to set the tone? And yeah, I'm just curious what you think of Dan's comments here.
Well, I would be delighted to get into all the Medicaid stuff because I think Republicans have a lot of problems in terms of their legislative agenda. But I'll say sort of the conduct of last night. The minority party, whichever it is, just needs to stop this idea that this is the venue to fight back. It's just not. They look silly no matter who does it. Al Green may be raising an important point, but for the millions of people who are watching at home, all they see is an old man with a cane sort of shouting. And it just looks silly. And similarly, last year, if everybody remembers, Marjorie Taylor Greene got in a shouting match with President Biden. And Biden was able to basically own her in that moment. The stack is just, or the deck is just stacked in favor of the president. The setting, the visuals, you just look silly. That this is not the place to have your resistance. And it really, I think, debases the whole thing. And Dan used a word earlier that I think is the right one. There's been such a deterioration of our politics, and I think that chamber is the setting where, in a lot of ways, it started. One of the most underappreciated moments, I think, in American politics is 2010 when Joe Wilson, congressman from South Carolina, yelled, "You lie," during a Barack Obama speech to Congress. That was a legitimate scandal that night.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody sort of was in HUD, like couldn't believe what had just happened. He had to issue an apology. But instead of actually like paying any political price, something funny happened. Joe Wilson got really famous, and every Republican loved Joe Wilson after that. And everybody wanted them at their events and at their fundraisers. And I think that was a real turning point where people realized, like, if you just like say crazy stuff, they're going to talk about you on TV. And so now Al Green, gets to have a few extra hits, but I think it just really turns off the entire country and makes everybody retreat to their corner. So I hate that the chamber has devolved into this just raucous shouting match. Maybe we should just sort of accept that's what it is and it's not what it used to be. But I think it leaves a sour tone or taste in the mouth for most people who are watching at home.
Yeah, it's a lurch for virality, right? Because like you're saying, not many people aren't watching State of the Union raw, right? They're watching on TikTok or Instagram or X. And frankly, they're trying to figure out what's happening on ABC, or NBC. And they're living in these sound bites. And I think we saw a lot of that showmanship. And Jonathan, I want to talk to you about the Trump show. I was following your Twitter feed last night, and you had some really interesting commentary. But I think before we get into any specific tweets, can you talk a little bit about, the First Lady's box and the guests and viral moments that stood out to you, good, bad, and otherwise?
Well, the box was a sort of relic of the pre-internet era. Dan knows this. That's a sort of Reagan era construct in which you have a celebrity or somebody recently been in the news. I think the guy's name was Skutnik. Is that right, Dan?
Lenny Skutnik.
Lenny Skutnik, who famously helped fish folks out of the Potomac River when there was a plane crash into the river in the early 80s, and Reagan saluted him in the box. And that has created this precedent in which presidents typically honor people in the box. Like with everything, Trump has taken it to a whole new level and to a whole new degree. And Trump has sort of made himself into somebody not just honoring folks, but also using people to drive home his agenda. But even more than that, and I thought like the peak Trump last night was like acting like, Bob Barker on The Price is Right, which is where he's really comfortable, actually. He's dutifully going through the teleprompter, but those aren't his words, and there's no actual heart behind it. It's not until he's really having fun, when he's off the prompter, when he's saying, this young man is joining us, and his dream, folks, is to go to West Point one day. Very hard to get into. It's tough. It's tough, And it's like it's like the Friars Club beats The Price is Right, And
it's as open.
I've got right here in my pocket the acceptance letter to the U.S. Military Academy. Oh my God, hug mom. And then there's the heartwarming young child who sadly had cancer, and look right behind you, walking down the steps is the head of the Secret Service. It's a show, right? And I think that's Trump's comfort level, and that's what he really enjoys doing more than the 90-minute teleprompter routine. Here's the thing. Brendan alluded to this earlier. tomorrow or the next day, we'll be on to the next thing with Trump. It's just nothing lasts. This is not like snow in Boston where it sits for months and months here on the side of the road, right? We're on to the next thing. And so, you know, it is the Trump show for a reason, because last night's installment was the kid going to West Point, the heartwarming child cancer patient, and then, you know, a number of other, Al Green with the stick and everything. But, you know, it'll be something else in tomorrow's show, right? Oh, the cliffhanger, oh, he hinted at a deal with the Ukrainians. Maybe we're going to have a deal after all. Tune in tomorrow night at 9 p.m. to find out. There's no continuity between one show to the next. The point is to keep the action moving. Give the people new material for a new day. One of the most underrated, but I think important parts of Trump's presidency so far, I could be wrong, I think he's talked to the cameras every single weekday since he became president. I think he's talked to the press in some way, shape, or form every single day. Because that's the point for him, is to be on TV, to be talking to cameras. He is the host, producer, director, and stage manager of this show. And that is the idea. That is the point for him. One last thing, Dan will appreciate this. When he first ran for president, 2015, 2016, you know, there was this tradition that the top tier candidates said he would never go to the spin room after the debates, right? Because the spin room was for the staff and for the surrogates of their candidates. The top level candidates would lower themselves to go to the spin room. That's what the folks who were sort of grasping to stay on stage would do for any kind of media attention. Well, Trump heard that and said, you're telling me that there's 100 TV cameras out there from Oslo to Tokyo, and I'm gonna have my staff go out there? Hell no, right? Because the point is the Trump to get the attention.
Right.
Brittany, can I say two things?
Sure, of course.
So,
You could say three.
no, I'll say two. One is probably, though, Jonathan, I think probably the last two moments, though, out of that speech probably will be the moment you're talking about. That I think they may be remembered for a while. That moment where that young boy had cancer,
Yeah.
and
He's 13 years
Secret
old.
Service makes him,
Right.
An agent.
Right.
And, and he had, in the West, he had like a handful of folks. And my guess is they will be remembered, a couple of those moments, I think. We'll see. One thing that really surprised me, I don't know if it's still going to be true.
But not politics or policy, right?
No,
Yeah, exactly,
but it's that moment, and he's an unmatched talent
Yeah.
in creating those kinds of
And-
TV moments.
People generally feel good about
Yeah. So,
what those two things were.
so that was, I mean,
It's not with me. It struck me for sure.
yeah. So, for all look, I think he created a lot of problems for himself last night, but I thought those moments, I think they will last. The second thing, though, that I would just say to folks here is that surprised me. As I say, I worked on all four of Biden's speech to the joint session. I guess one's a joint session and three's a State of the Union. Is that how it works? And to go to your point about how lasting they are, the best State of the Union he gave was in March of 2024, and he was out of the campaign by July. So, but the point I was going to make is this: that I think it's a top. When we would look at like the most viewed shows in America, it was like the top 50 or 100. It was like 96 of them were like NFL football games.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay? I mean, if you want to understand America,
Or the
that's
pregame show.
right. I mean, that's what it is. And then like two of the others were like college football games.
Yeah.
The State of the Union was still hanging in there. So it is a big moment for to be seen and to be heard. It'll be interesting to see how much viewership it had last night, but it is still, for all the ways it has changed and deteriorated, it still remains one of the single best moments where people take a look at the president.
And also, I mean, so he knows how to put on a show, whether it's a State of the Union, but he also goes to the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Your point about football
Yeah.
being,
Suppose you want to go to the most watched game, the
Yeah,
most watched
yeah.
moment.
I mean, he hasn't a kind of innate ability to show up where people are watching. And then he also has the ability, for better or worse, to draw even more attention to himself in those moments. And so he takes advantage of that. And as Jonathan said, he's always in front of the cameras. He's always speaking. He knows that he can control the conversation, that he can dominate the stage, and that there's a kind of, certainly early on in a presidential term, there's an irresistible quality about that to cable television. And so he knows how to manipulate the media way beyond what I think any other president has ever been able to do. I mean, Obama had certain talents on that front. I don't think President Biden was ever terribly comfortable in that realm. Bill Clinton had some. Reagan obviously had some, but Trump has taken it to a different level.
The attention is the point. There was this great moment last night where he said, talking about the CHIPS Act, which was a very significant piece of legislation, far-reaching economic impact, bipartisan support, was worked on for years by a coalition of lawmakers, ranging from Chuck Schumer to Todd Young, a liberal and a conservative, New York and Indiana. In any event, Trump just last night says, we got to get rid of the CHIPS Act. It turns to Mike Johnson, the speaker, and says, you can use the money to address the deficit or do whatever you want with it.
Yeah.
But one of the people who was very strongly in favor of that CHIPS Act and was trying to get investment in Ohio was Vice President
Who's
J.D.
behind
Vance.
behind his other shoulder. And Columbus has a huge Intel factory coming in, which tells you everything about Trump, whatever you want to do with it, because he's not worried about those details. He's worried about today at 3 p.m., what are we going to say to the cameras? Because that's the show, right?
You heard about Jonathan Martin's column in Politico.
Yeah, well, we'll say about that. Exactly.
Can I just jump in
I'm
on
on
that?
the
Of course,
Yeah.
please.
I think we're hitting on something really important. He has so little care for what Congress does. I don't know how to put this in historical context. This is one of the least ambitious legislative agendas I can ever remember from a president. And it's funny because we talk about Trump in these grand terms and all these big things that he wants to do. Usually a State of the Union,
That's a good insight.
you've got all kinds of stuff that he's asking Congress to do on all kinds of issues. The primary thing that Donald Trump is asking Congress to do is to keep tax rates where they currently are.
Yeah.
That's the big one. We talk about tax cuts. All they are is preserving the tax law from 2017. He's got a few other sort of, hanger-on tax policies that he wants attached to it.
True.
But that is the big thing that he wants them to do. Obviously, there's a big debate about spending cuts. I don't think his heart is in that either. And especially in the first year of your presidency, you've got 4 years to try to do things. There was so little laid out that he actually wants Congress to do. I think that's somewhat underappreciated, and it gets to everything that you all have been talking about, how he'd much rather just be signing executive orders, just doing day-to-day president stuff, putting things into law. Sure, if I can sign a bill, that sounds cool. But in terms of making lasting policy, it's remarkable how thin the actual legislative agenda is.
And 10 years on, still doesn't know the basics about lawmaking or legislation, and is never going to be interested, right?
Well, Brendan, do you think he's farming it out to Elon Musk, who wore a suit yesterday, who was there in the gallery? Or, I'm curious what else you think of just Musk being there and what that means too.
I mean, he likes it in that it's like showing action. But again, the Musk thing is so much smoke for very little impact. I mean, I don't want to minimize the people who are losing their jobs. That is obviously very serious to those people. But the federal workforce is 4% of our budget. If you somehow get rid of a quarter of the workforce, which they're not going to be able to do, you're talking about 1% of our budget. And then he has the gumption to say, we're going to balance the budget. You're not even sniffing close to that. It all feels very sort of thin and fake. And it's very obvious that they're doing that. Musk, of course, is this neophyte to all this. And you hear them talking about some of these things like they've just, discovered a new chemical compound, when it's just very basic stuff about how government works. And oh, there's a website that we can look up where all this spending goes. And then they get it all wrong. A lot of attention on Doge. And I think that maybe he likes that it presents this idea that he's slashing the federal government. But in reality, the impact in the long run is very minimal for our deficit. It may just end up, breaking a bunch of agencies in the short term in ways that they're not able to fix once they realize that they're broken.
And to Brendan's point earlier, his heart's not even really in that. He's never been a deficit hawk. He's never been consumed with balancing the budget. And I have long believed.
Although he said last night he wants to balance the budget.
Yeah, exactly. I know.
It just came out of nowhere.
Do you think that was written or ad-libbed, that line?
I think it was ad-libbed. Yeah, because he's heard it before and probably knows it would sound good in the moment. But I've long been of the school that one of two things are going to happen. Maybe both things are going to happen. Look, there are very few constraints on Trump. One of them is sustained negative coverage, which is why when the great Trump tick, when any of his nominees are in trouble, he's always reported as saying, "Do you think so-and-so is going to make it? You think he's going to make it?" It's like, well, you aren't a passive actor here, you know, but he kind of is, though, in some ways. So anytime that there's sustained negative coverage on anything or anybody, Trump starts to edge away and get nervous and sort of distance himself, because that is the whole issue for him, is the coverage. And I kind of wonder what if two things are going to happen. There's going to be sustained negative coverage about Musk wielding a hatchet that Trump's going to ultimately grow uncomfortable with. And governors and lawmakers in his own party are ultimately going to say, good intentions, I'm with you on the spirit of it, but Mr. President, this is not waste, fraud, and abuse. This program, XYZ, is important to my state or my district. This is going to hurt me and you, and it's going to hurt your voters. And that will drive Trump away. I just don't think Trump's heart is in what so far has been the big project of his own administration, which is DOGE, because that's never been what animates him. And I think once the coverage and or the pain is felt by his own party, I think he's going to shy away from it.
And I do feel like it's worth noting that while it might not impact overall budget, it is impacting thousands of federal workers, research institutions like this, research into science. Like, there is at least a very personal impact for a lot of people, at least the nation's capital, where both me and Jonathan live at least a little bit of the time. And I just do think that we're seeing reverberations on a very personal level, at least what our reporting in Washington. So I just feel like it's worth it. There is a human impact to all of this. Yes, of course.
About the Musk project. Last night in the speech, the president repeated something that Musk had put out, which is ticking through all of the people who are 120 years old or 150 years old, et cetera, who are on Social Security, which has been widely debunked. I ran into somebody at the National Governors Association who had worked at Social Security back some years ago. And he said, there is a policy at the Social Security Administration that when somebody who seems to be on the rolls at age 115, they are taken off, because there's nobody in America who is 115 years old. So Trump spews this out because it sounds good. But I think that there is a serious piece to what the whole DOGE effort is about, which is to rebalance control over who has control over what. They are making a serious effort to expand the power of the presidency. Spending cuts are an aspect of this. Firing federal workers is an aspect of this. But the broader question is, how much control can be concentrated in the presidency? And that's where these legal fights are heading. And it's not clear that he's going to win or lose those fights. There are some of these fights that he may well win. Particularly control over the so-called independent agencies like the FCC. How much control can a president exercise over that? There's a good legal case about that, which the Supreme Court will have to decide. And the Supreme Court, under this Chief Justice and the conservative majority, tends to favor executive control. So some of this, while there's been no consistent way of describing what they're doing or an understanding of what the real goals are, there is a serious purpose underneath it that I think has less to do with Elon Musk and more to do with somebody like Russ Vought, who's the director of the Office of Management and Budget.
Great point. We all have to read your column and hear more about that. I know we're running up on time, and I want to actually take questions from the audience. But before we get there, can we just very briefly talk about the Democratic response? We just haven't mentioned Lee Slotkin of Michigan, and there's some Dems who I'm seeing on Twitter saying this is the best response to the union they've seen in modern times. Mike, I'll ask you, were you able to catch a little bit of it? What do you think? And then Brendan, I want to hear your take.
Well, I thought it was very good. I thought, as people said, she did a those are very difficult things to do. I thought she did a really good job with it. Where I think it's heading though is more what Dan was talking about in terms of, I think this budget fight's going to be a big fight. I think we're going to come face to face with what happens in Ukraine pretty close, pretty soon. We'll see whether or not, I think, Jonathan, one of the things that Trump historically has been receptive to is the market and in the financial community. I don't get the sense that he's going to be responsive on this, although I think they're betting on that. So I thought Senator Slotkin did a really good job, and I thought she did a really good job in something which, if you think about some of those responses over the past few years, they've been really difficult. If you look at Secretary of State Rubio, and I remember when he's like chasing down a glass of water in his.
Or, Katie Britt was like parody on SNL, later that weekend, if you guys remember.
Joe Kennedy with chapstick or something. So they're really hard to do. It's a really thankless task. But you know what? She did a good job with it. And she laid a pretty good framework for the party. But I do think reality will be intruding very soon, and that's where the fight's going to be.
What do you think, Brennan?
It was super safe, right? They've seen people screw this up in the past, both in delivery and setting. And so, look, we're just going to put a bunch of American flags behind you. Keep it simple. We're not in anybody's kitchen. We're not having an awkward walk down stairs. And she hit on the issues that people say that they care the most about, the economy, and tried to put a very normal face on a party that has been accused of sort of being out there. I talk about things that are forgettable. I don't imagine anybody's going to be talking about this beyond our conversation right now. But that's probably good, because you can only really lose at these things. You can't win, and she didn't lose. So there you go.
Right. Probably won't be a SNL segment this weekend, but we'll see. We'll see. I want to open it up to the audience in the last few minutes that we have here. Feel free to direct your question and introduce yourself if you like, but no pressure.
Hi, James Coltella at HKS. As I traveled the country after the election, asking the question, is America too big to govern? I came across a young woman in Versailles, Kentucky, who said to me, it's a privilege to be able to be concerned with social privileges. And I wondered whether, given the ideological differences that currently are evident in the US, can we close the gap, or has the great experiment really run its course?
Let's take that one. Yeah, anybody you want to direct that question to particularly?
Anyone who wishes to answer.
Mike, you're concerned about democracy. You have any takes?
If the question is, I'm confident we can get to a better place. I'm confident that the experiment isn't over. I'm also confident that it's being pressured like it hasn't been obviously since the Civil War. And when you say, the quote was what it's a privilege to be able to talk about what?
Privilege to be able to be concerned with social privileges.
What do you think that meant?
Well, she sort of looked at people in cities, and she was very much an advocate of, for example, abortion and women's rights. But she said, for me, her greatest concern was, I quote, can I crack open a can of food and put it on the table? But people, the Democrats in particular, were talking about something that didn't bear on her reality. And her concern was, we now have very, very different realities, people feeling very differently about things in different ways. Do I see myself in other people in this country? Do they see me?
Well, it's certainly true that in many ways the country's getting more separated, segregated between rural and urban and suburban. When people are living more in kind of a silo where they tend to reinforce their own views. But I still think that, well, first of all, I know there's a a narrative that the Democrats don't and didn't talk about these things. And I don't buy it. I just don't. First of all, I mean, I understand, you know, I mean, I know what Biden and the Biden administration spent a lot of time on, and with real results. I also watched what Vice President Harris talked about in her campaign. I think it was very focused on people's day-to-day lives and the cost of things that they were facing. That doesn't mean that there isn't a powerful narrative out there that, you know, is working against that, you know, where, so I guess, you know, I'm optimistic long-term. I'm not optimistic short-term. Is that how I'd answer it?
Thank you. Also, we have 2 microphones too, if you guys want to line up. Feel free, no pressure.
Good morning. I'm Heather Cohey. I'm a National Security Fellow here, and I've lived all over. I'm an independent. I grew up in Texas, and I'm back in Texas right now. And I'll tell you, in watching last night, my impression of what Trump was doing was touching into this cultural desire to feel like you're doing the right things, you're being a good person, you're going to church, or, you know, checking whatever boxes of living life well and being a winner, right? And I think from my perspective, and I'm guilty because is if people only really understood the budget debate or had any idea about what the words liberal world order really mean, or what the liberal consensus is, or what mandatory spending is in the budget debate, if they only really understood, and maybe we can educate them. And so as far as we're talking to the Trump show, I think we're missing the larger point, which is it's effective in winning over that desire to be a part of something where we're winners, where we're looking like we're going to take care of business, and we're not on the defensive trying to explain if you really only just understood. And so I have to say that when I watched Slotkin last night, I finally felt a sense of, thank goodness she's not feeling like she's on the defensive. She's feeling like she's trying to regain that, yeah, we're going to wave the flag, because all of our history, even the ugly parts of our history, and not whitewashing the history like we heard at the end of the speech last night, makes us the great country, and we do have a bright future. So have you guys done any thought about how to tie in to that suburban group of people that are trying to go to baseball, little league, go to church, do right by their family, live a good life, and don't know a lot and don't care to know a lot about the ins and outs of what we all take for granted as common knowledge about how things really work?
The Democratic Party, you can be assured, is spending millions of dollars right now, and we'll spend millions of dollars more on polling, focus groups, and every other kind of bit of research to figure out precisely how to project what you're talking about. Look, a lot of this comes down to messenger and moment. Okay. And Barack Obama in 2008 and Bill Clinton in 1992 are great examples of this. They were superb messengers, but they also really benefited from the moment too. And the great question ahead of 2028 is, can the Democrats find a messenger who's going to be able to drive a message that people actually hear about the core issues facing the country? And will the moment offer a kind of opportunity for it to be heard? You know, for all their talents, Clinton and Obama were also the beneficiaries of great timing. The country was exhausted by 12 years of Republican presidents and a recession in 1992. And obviously, we all know 2008, the Iraq War and the global financial collapse was a huge help for Obama. So I mean, a lot of this is just pure timing. And for all the money and the focus groups and the polling that they should be spending, I think a good bit of this comes down to, is there going to be an appetite in the country in 2028, like there was in 2020, to turn the page? We're exhausted by the Trump show. Let's get something different again. And is there a Democratic messenger who can say, yes, I'm the candidate of, to borrow your phrase, little league and apple pie and mom and Americana, just like the rest of you? Who is that, you know?
Can I add one thing to what Jonathan is saying? And that is the two presidents that he has mentioned, and I agree with him on his basic point about that, also suffered historic losses for their party while they were in office. It was in Bill Clinton's presidency that the Republicans won the House for the first time in 40 years. And since then, the House has gone back and forth and back and forth. Under President Obama, huge losses in 2010, and a loss of the Senate in 2014, if I'm not mistaken. The challenge for the Democratic Party is not simply to think about how you win back the White House in 2028, but how to expand their coalition in a way that they can win in places and in down ballot races where they're not able to win at this point. And it goes beyond the suburbs into some of the rural areas. It goes from states that are swing states to states that currently are pretty red. How do they do that? And that's a huge project and is not something that's going to be solved even in the next 4 years, I would guess.
Thank you for your question. We're up at time. We have time for one more, I think.
Great, thank you. Hi, my name is Ketan Ahuja, and I'm a fellow at the Growth Lab here. And I think that this conversation has had two different theories of media. And one is talking about, as you just said, Brandon, the issues that people say they care about, like the economy, and you got that in the response to the State of the Union. And another is just doing everything you can to attract attention and spin a narrative and violate norms while doing so. And I wonder if it seems like the latter theory of media is more effective. And I wonder how useful it makes talking about things like the issues that people say they care about as a kind of focus of dialogue.
Can you clarify exactly what your question is?
It just how I guess what is a more useful kind of theory of media in this?
What we're offering?
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Well, I guess
Well, you talk.
Oh, yeah.
Brendan.
Brendan, go ahead.
I would say Donald Trump clearly believes that more is more when it comes to media. And we live in a period where the sort of attention economy is perhaps the most important thing in politics. And this has been one of his many superpowers, is that he just blocks out everybody else and commands things. Now, that's for better or worse for him. And you can argue that in 2020, that was for worse. He was so much in our psyche. But I think there's a real contrast to how Democrats have looked at this. Democrats have been very cautious. Kamala Harris and Tim Walz were an extremely media cautious campaign. And Donald Trump has obviously never been that. And I think the Democrats could learn from that a little bit and take a few more risks, not put so much pressure on every one single interview that happens every once in a while. Because that's just the world we live in. When things do come and go so quickly, you need to be sort of in that cycle, or else you're going to be forgotten and forget what your message is. You're just not even going to be heard at all.
Did you just want to say?
Well, I tend to agree with what Brendan is talking about. I guess the only caveat I would add to that is that Trump is unique. And it is a little bit difficult to imagine who could be the next Trump in the way that Trump is. Now, J.D. Vance seems to be trying to do it in a J.D. Vance way. He's out there a lot. He's doing a lot of interviews. He's not shy from making arguments and mixing things up. He seems to have kind of caught the zeitgeist of what it is to be Trumpian. But it's a difficult. It's difficult to emulate somebody who is as unusual as Donald Trump has been in our politics, and so I think it I think it behooves people who want to be in that realm or competing on those stages to do it in ways that are true to themselves and not try to, say, okay, this is how Trump did it. I'm going to do a version of that.
Yeah, let me just add, I mean, political talent matters a ton. And I think that you can make a very good argument that we elect presidents not on moment or their policies, but on who is the best political athlete. But it doesn't even need to extend to just being Donald Trump. There was a small midtown mayor who ended up becoming a top tier presidential candidate and the Secretary of Transportation, simply out of, I would argue, doing lots of interviews and being actually really good.
IOP too, right?
IOP.
Yeah.
Come on, Brandon.
I know, I was going to drop that in last. Thank you. You got ahead of me. So I think that there could be, there are ways to do this without being so bombastic. It's just, it requires a willingness to take a few risks. But again, you have to have some level of talent.
One other thing I would say, you got a minute? We got to close.
Oh, sure.
Is when I started in this business in 1981 as a political pollster. One of the first things you learn when you do political polling is sometimes the worst person to ask about why they're doing something is a voter. And I've often been in the view that what people say they care about is not what they care about. And which is why I continue to debate the proposition about how central the economy was to the 2024 election. And I don't dispute the fact that it made people unhappy and obviously the wrong direction number, the economic numbers. I get all that. But then ask yourself a question, especially if you're Trump and you're trying to win those final voters who are in theory up for grabs. Okay. Why do you spend the last month of your campaign attacking the vice president on using taxpayer money for transgender surgeries and prisoners? Why do you do that? Why do you spend so much money attacking her whether or not she's using pronoun X, Y, or Z? Why? I think because they believed that the real power in the election was elsewhere, and that it was around a real cultural battle. And they were engaged in an effort to make the vice president unacceptable to the country, sort of along the lines of one of these questions that was raised earlier about embracing small town American values. And so I've always, at least when I've looked at campaigns, what I've really tried to think about is what, it's not necessarily what you ask somebody a question and they give you an answer. It's really, is it really what's driving them? So I don't know that it's a difference in the media of getting clicks and attention versus, whatever the alternative is. I think it's actually a clear assessment about what's driving the election. I mean, for example, one of the most famous lines in politics is "It's the economy, stupid." Right?
Your friend James
Carville was a friend of mine. I was in the 1992 campaign when he came up with that phrase. So in that campaign, the single most important ad and the single most important issue and the single most important state was not the economy. It was welfare reform in Michigan. So did he really win on the economy? So I guess that's how I look at it, is really looking at what is really driving people. When people who are running campaigns are making assessments about how hundreds of millions of dollars they're using, is it going to be effective? I think Trump made it pretty clear where he thought the election was going to be decided.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your question. I think it's the goodest place as ever to leave it.
That kind of a downer? I don't know.
I'm so grateful. Thank you, Brendan, to come. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you guys coming out. Please come to any of our study groups or office hours. We're always here to talk, and we just really, really appreciate the interesting conversation. Thanks, guys. Of course.